Connor, who wants to talk about gender abolition. I did listen last week. I can't say that I remember everything that went on, but I would like to follow up with that and start there. So, Connor,
awesome.
You are on with Jimmy and Ben, and you've got Ben to do the honors of kicking off this conversation. So go right ahead. What is on your mind?
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to do a follow-up of last week. So first of all, don't discount yourself, Jimmy. I do want to hear your opinion on it as well. But
of course,
I guess I wanted to say a few things about it that I guess I felt like I had on my mind, but maybe only like post rewatching it and being like, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I should have said that.
That is the life that we live as hosts. Welcome to the club.
What you got?
I think first of all, do you want me to rehash kind of what gender abolition is, just for anyone who might be watching, or?
Yeah. Just give the definition that we're using, so the audience can catch up. Sure.
So, gender abolition, at least as far as I understand it, is like as we have it now. We have different genders. For a while, we had just strictly men and women. Now we have various non-binary genders. Some may class transgender as a different thing. I wouldn't necessarily. But the idea of gender abolition is to move towards a state of, I guess, a society in which we no longer have gender classification. So instead of each person being a man, a woman, or some other non-binary designation, they would just be, I'm Connor, that's Dr. Ben, that's Jimmy Jr., and anything that would be normally considered gendered, like dresses, makeup, watching football with the boys type shit, would all just be things that you do and don't imply anything about your gender, and your gender doesn't imply anything about doing those things. Does that seem satisfactory?
Yeah. So what were the thoughts you had that you wanted to make sure were communicated this time?
Yeah, so I do think a couple times during the last call, there were a couple things of I guess the idea of a general overarching idea of enforcement, like how is this enforced? How do we go about making people do this? And I wanted to, because I feel like that is possibly a bad optic thing that gender abolition has. And I've noticed some people looking at it that way, which is understandable. There are people who push it in that direction of trying to, quote unquote, take away gender from people, stop saying you're a man, stop saying you're a woman. Which I don't think is necessary, nor is it how you should go about doing gender abolition. I don't think it's something that is enforced. It is something that you basically do what we're doing now. You have a conversation with somebody and you kind of talk them through the logic of gender and talk them through how kind of illogical it can be sometimes, and kind of get them to the point where it's not something that you do with the expectation of them, I'm going to stop having a gender. But at the very least, they stop viewing other people through the lens of gender, and more so just for each person's individuality, which I do think will lead to some people dropping gender. I wasn't always a gender. I didn't even understand trans people at a certain point in my life. And then I walked down that line myself and I was like, yeah, I guess I don't really need this anymore. It doesn't really do anything for me.
Yeah, I think my concern with that is, I think we're approaching it from different sides of the picture. Because I agree, that's what we should be doing on an individual basis. However, even if we do that, we still have to engage with society as a whole, and that society still has such a basis in assumption of gender. And I think that it's really difficult to make gender abolitionism a broader thing, just because society is like it's so inherently ingrained into our society and the way it's structured. And so, yes, you can have those individuals that decide to engage with people in their circle as individuals instead of a gender. But I think, especially coming at this from the perspective as a binary trans person, I still have to engage with society in a very specific way in order to be referred to with the pronouns that I use, and to like be able to like perform my gender in a way that society will respond to me in a way that's favorable for me. And so it's not as much as like individuals respecting each other as it is how much do I have to perform in order to be recognized. And I think that's a question at a broader level of society that is very, very hard to do. And so I think when we say enforce, we don't necessarily mean that they have to make this a legal thing, but how do we disconnect gender from our societal structure to where we don't have that connection? And I think that has to happen before we can really evaluate if gender abolitionism is like possible as a society.
Yeah,
And
your thoughts,
I think,
Connor.
I think that was something sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going.
Oh, I was going to say that is something that I think I discussed with my friend, at least maybe not in exactly those terms, but kind of we talked about the sort of society that we live in currently, 2025. And I think it was specifically, we were discussing like femininity and like performing femininity and things such as that, where like me and my friend were talking about like how part of the way that we like attack the like societal structure we have, like the patriarchy, is by performing acts of femininity, which were, have been always sort of frowned upon. And I think part of that conversation that we had, and I also wrote this down from last week's conversation of like I think you used the phrases of like the sort of consequences of like incorrectly presenting your gender. I think last week you said growing your hair out, you might be like she heard more. And I do agree that that's like a really big hurdle to get over. And obviously it's sort of something that like gender abolition can't do by itself. I think gender abolition is one of those things that kind of goes hand in hand with other broad societal movements like feminism and whatnot, which try to dissolve the sort of barriers we have and like these different gender ideals. And I think that is kind of mainly the attack you go at it by is, I mean, kind of like I said, like kind of what you all do, but maybe on a broader scale is, yeah, like interpersonally, you can like talk your friends through the logic of, how do you present your gender, and kind of talking to the line of like, you're probably not 100% masculine in everything you do. You're probably not 100% feminine. But none of that makes you more or less a man or woman. And I think that it's something that it's sort of an idea that spreads, I guess. It is, but it is definitely a very difficult hurdle to cross just by the ideas of gender abolition alone.
So may I interrupt?
I think I heard you say something different.
Yeah. So I would like to kind of just posit my thoughts, if I will, if I may. So these societal mindset shifts that you're talking about, actually, they take a really long time. So the people that are in positions like myself and Ben and Richard, and even you, Connor, having these conversations to normalize things like breaking down the barriers that gender creates, are the ways that the seeds are planted and are the ways that people see that it's normalized. I don't think that in my lifetime I will see anything like what we're talking about, but I do think that when history is written, people will be able to look back, who knows, several hundred years and see that people like us were having these conversations and challenging the societal norms that really do stem from a more conservative part of our past, traditionally rooted in religion. And so that's important to understand. You know, we have to set realistic goals when we talk about making changes to our culture. If we look at female female, but women, I mean, there was a time where those two things were synonymous. Of course, I would argue that being a woman and being female is not. But in any case, the women's right to vote, women's rights movements, equal rights movements, you know, the coming from a place where women were subjugated and their religion told them to do so, or where African Americans were subjugated and that was helped along by religion, but more importantly, it was just helped along by society in general or economics. You know, those took very long time periods to be challenged and for any successes to be implemented. And I would argue that those barriers are not even really dissolved today. You know, they're so delicate, and the mindset shift of our culture needs to be one that's enduring, to where when challenges arise, we can overcome those challenges. And I think that our country is being challenged in that way now. I think that a more conservative mindset is on the rise. It's rooted in religion. It challenges the value of transgender people and women and minorities, et cetera. And, you know, what happens now? Well, we have to endure. We have to make contributions to society, not only on this small and maybe more intimate platform where there's just a few of us having a conversation, but structurally in our society, I think that those things will come to pass as well. Although that's kind of more of a long-term game as well. So I do have a couple other thoughts on this right now. I just want to kind of see if you or Ben have any comments on what I said so far, and then I do have something else that I want to get to before we move on. But Connor, go ahead.
I did want to say one quick thing just in case Ben had anything. I wanted to say that that's another thing that sort of came up in the last call, was sort of the I don't think we're going to see this in our lifetime type thing, which I agree. So I'm 21 currently. I agree that in my lifetime I will probably not see a gender abolished society. I will say this is also with a heavy dollop of optimism that the next 4 years will go as good as they can, and then we will quickly rebound back to where we were 10 years ago, because like social acceptance has just gone down the absolute fucking shitter.
Yeah, but like, you might have been there 8 or 10 years ago, but 45% of our population was never there. You know, so
yeah. I mean,
the challenge is ongoing.
There was still a large amount of social acceptance. I did want to say, like, I think like you were saying that there is still a lot of problems, like with women and people of color, like just minorities and those who are generally marginalized in general. Like, I agree, but I do want to say that like there are people who I believe, at least for like the civil rights movement, are still alive today, like people who are marching for that. And I agree that in my lifetime I will never see a gender abolished world, but I do think that in my lifetime I will see the seeds that it planted. If that's like, you could call that what we're doing today that, but I think like a genuine planting of the seed will happen in my lifetime.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I just think we need to dial back on what our goals and expectations are for the time being. And I think sometimes, and especially I see a lot of progressive people trying to take 800 steps forward when that's not where we need to be just yet. We need to kind of focus a bit smaller. And I do like what you're doing, how you're taking this on a smaller scale with the people around you. But I mean, I think, sure, eventually it'd be great to get to a point where gender is not a concept within our society, apart from just being a personal, like something that you personally identify with. But I think maybe we focus our effort now more on, let's get trans people accepted. Let's get non-binary people accepted. Like and I think a lot of people when you take such a big leap in your goal for social change, can be very intimidated, and that can be off-putting for some people. I'm not saying that it doesn't mean the idea like shouldn't be sought after, but I think we need to just tackle these first things. And if we open the door to, you don't have to have a gender, like instead of saying right now, like convincing people that gender doesn't need to exist, like start with, hey, you don't have to have one. This doesn't have to be something like for you in your life. You don't have to abide by these.
I think is like a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. I think we just need the shift to be, instead of focusing on this big end goal, and that can be like an ideal that we think about, but I think the focus just needs to be smaller steps of progression, and not being so worried about, are we doing this perfectly or not, but are we moving in a better direction? Absolutely. I think we're on the same page. I think we're just approaching the same topic a little bit differently.
Well, and I hold on. I do want to say one more quick thing, and I know Jimmy, you had something you wanted to go off on. I did want to say, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I don't want to say like we're coming at it from the same direction. I want to say that I think maybe I'm coming off incorrectly, that like I am not asking, or I'm not saying like we should take this like really big step. That's another thing I talked about with my friend. In fact, I made a joke that if there was a progressive candidate out there that had literally the perfect platform, but was like a 60-year-old trans woman and called herself a transsexual, that like fucking a bunch of leftists would be like, no, I'm not going to vote for you because this one policy position is bad, which is just how you refer to yourself. I am not that. I don't believe that we need to take all the steps to be a perfect society all at once. I hope, like, maybe it hasn't come off as that so far, but what I'm here to do mostly is to hear y'all's opinions on it, but also just get the idea out there, like as a start. Like, I don't want to bring this idea to the table to say, hey, everybody in the comment section, everybody watching, go do gender abolitionism now, but just to at least bring the idea to them, like, hey, question your ideas of gender. I know we already probably do that a lot, like a lot of the people who view this, or at least that aren't like theists, and maybe some as well. But
yeah, I think the issue. Yeah, I think the issue in the communication is that the term itself, gender abolitionism, carries with it like that end goal of an ideal. A
lot of baggage.
And I think it's a similar concept where if you take people who are trying to be more progressive or have more progressive ideas, and you tell them, let's all be communist right now. Sure, like there are certain people that probably would agree with an end goal that is more communist, but a lot of people also would be very scared by that. And I think that using the term sometimes can backfire a little bit on the efforts that we're trying to make. And so that I think that's my sense, is like using a bit of caution with saying that, oh, like we're implementing gender abolitionism with this, and where many people might think, oh, we're coming at this from a feminist perspective or a more like trans-friendly, LGBTQ friendly perspective. And so I think it's just, for a lot of people, the terminology sounds a bit farther ahead from where we're at.
Scary.
Yeah. And so, go ahead, Connor. Go ahead and comment, and then I wanna press on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I believe I was watching a similar call between Arden and someone who also had that, and they were of that sort of perspective of like taking gender away. And I think that, like, I saw a lot of comments that are like, I, as like a trans man, fought very hard to be where I'm at. I don't want my gender taken away. I think I understand that perspective of like hearing the term like gender abolition, and whether you're cis or trans, if you are very comfortable with your gender, it can be a very threatening term. And I guess like part of what I wanted to do is kind of make it seem a little less threatening and more realistic as to what the goal is. But
yeah, and I'm on the same page. Like I told you, like I told you last week, like I ultimately do think that gender abolitionism is like a good idea to pursue. Like I am in favor of it, but it's that how do we overcome the societal barriers of getting to that place? And I think that's where the terminology ends up being kind of backfiring. But I don't disagree with you on like most things. It's just that I think the approach is where we're disconnecting a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, Connor. So I think that what is really going to be fruitful is demonstrating to the whole of society that there is a benefit for everybody to not have gender identity. So I will liken that to the idea that economics tends to improve, let's say, when a majority of the female population of a given society are in the workforce, voluntarily, I should say, because forced labor doesn't really have that effect. But it would be difficult for the United States to be as prosperous as we are if we didn't have 66% of our female population gainfully employed. If we decided to take this conservative step back and say, well, and not as a policy measure, but just as a culture in general, well, women, of course, belong in the kitchen. I think that you would see a dramatic scale back of our success as a country. And nobody would want that, okay? I think that people would be calling for a restoration of women back into the workforce. And so the women have demonstrated that they are essential for a society to flourish. And I think that likening the absence of gender to the overall success of a society is what is going to make it successful in the end. Okay. And I'll give you, I think I have a few more maybe anecdotes I'd like to share. So this is kind of silly, but not really if it were, because I'd be totally on board if this were the case. But I'm somewhat of a Star Wars fan, and there was a series that came out a couple years ago about Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi, one of the protagonists, I should say, of the Star Wars series, and they recounted, there was the series was recounting his younger life, but in it,
I'm not that
there was
young.
What's that? I know. But in it, there was a scene or a few scenes where all of the men and women in the military were referred to as sir. And I was like, whoa, like that's pretty cool. And I'm in the military. I could see how that could be beneficial, because I've had people, especially women, say things like, well, I'm one of the only girls in the unit. And I have to be like, you're not a girl, you're a lieutenant. Or you're not a girl, you're a staff sergeant. Like, I don't care what your gender is. You've got a certain amount of responsibility and authority. And I think if our society as a whole sees the benefit of that kind of thing, that's where it becomes acceptable. And that's what, it would take a little bit of institutionalization, but that would usually be a reflection of what society wants. And again, there's kind of this timeline where we plant these seeds, we have a cultural mindset shift, and then it gets implemented. And then, it proves to be a success. And so that's where I see things going over a very long period of time. And I think that's all I have to say on that. So what are your comments there?
I actually really appreciate that anecdote, because it kind of helps me with what I was going to say to the first bit of that, which is due to the suffragette movement kind of like working on its own and like where we are today, we do have a lot of like societal, I guess you could say, like evidences to the benefit of having like women in the workplace. In a world where we have basically always had at least two genders, it is a little more difficult to give like proper hard evidence of this is the benefit of having no gender, besides individual anecdotes of like non-binary people being particularly happy with themselves, I suppose. But like it is, that I was going to say that's like a really difficult ask, I guess. Though I mean it's what you got to do.
I think there is precedence.
That is actually a really good point about the military.
Yeah, I think there is precedence.
I suppose I just haven't seen it.
In our very own lives, right? Or in our very own generations of mindset shifts towards certain groups of people. And that's why I think that it's possible to move in the direction that you are hopeful of, and I am hopeful of. And Ben, I'm sure, is hopeful of. I see you nodding, Ben. I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think maybe this first step instead of convincing people that, like that nobody needs to have gender, like even if we just have that first step of like, some people don't need to have gender, like you can keep your gender. You could also not keep it, like give people the option instead of making it seem like it has to change so rapidly. But as long as we're getting people to understand, it's okay to not follow society's gender roles. It's okay to like making it more of it's okay to not do these things instead of like, oh, we're just gonna take this away. And so that's just what I perceive as people being people's immediate reaction would be, why are you taking this from me? But I think we're all on the same page that nobody wants to take anything away from people. It's still you're still able to have gender as an individual like thing for yourself, but yeah,
and
I think that's all I have to say on that.
100% agree with that. I like, that is one of the things, like in calling this show, like one of the things I'm trying to do is combat the idea that all gender abolitionism is, or at least a big part of it is, I'm going to come to your house and I'm going to steal your gender. And that is, some people push it that way. I think, like you do, incredibly harmful and negative and just entirely like I'm finding 40 synonyms to say it's unhelpful, both to the people it's trying to supposedly help and to the cause it's supposedly trying to push. But yeah, I 100% agree that I think like gender abolitionism as an ideology should be more on personal freedom and like personal freedom to express yourself in the way you want to, and not necessarily kowtowing to society's ideas of what you should be. And kind of like how you said it, like not making it that like you shouldn't have gender, but that there is this option out there of not having it and that being okay, and you get to be yourself in the happiest way you want to be, and you don't have to change anything about yourself and who you are. You just don't necessarily need to fit yourself or other people into a box. I did also want to respond to Jimmy real quick. With your military example, I am now like thinking of other examples in which there are I guess you could maybe call them like sub-societies or ecosystems, you could say human ecosystems, where we show not having gender. And I was going to say a really cheesy example is, have you ever watched the show, I think it's called The Bear?
I did, but it stressed me out so much that I couldn't continue. I did. I've watched it and it was incredibly stressful. So Connor, I'll let you get through this real quick.
Kitchen.
Yeah, I'll let you make this anecdote real quick and then we have to move on. So go ahead and final thoughts.
Absolutely. I was going to say, in the show The Bear and in possibly real kitchens too, he calls everyone chef. It doesn't matter whether it's like a guy or a girl or whoever. It is yes chef, no chef, regardless of their gender. And I think that is also another example of like where we have a sub-society of basically a genderless way, like classification system, where you're not the only girl in the kitchen. You're a chef. You're not the only. You're not like a guy in the kitchen. You're a chef. But absolutely, and I'm so glad you all had me on today. And as always, trans rights.
Yeah, you got 2 weeks. You got 2 weeks in a row. You're almost famous, and you got 2 weeks in a row with Ben. I understand. So, so good on you. But thank you,
Thanks
Connor.
for coming back.